In this video, I'm going to be going over luminosity masks within Photoshop. Now, luminosity masks are a traditionally difficult task to understand within Photoshop, but I'm going to be breaking this down really simple for you. I'm going to be going over first what luminosity masks are, then I'm going to give you a few examples of what they can be used for, and then I'm going to go into how to create them, and then I'm going to show you some popular third-party plugins you can use to make your luminosity masking experience even easier. So with that being said, let's start from the very top here. So what is a luminosity mask? And in order to understand what a luminosity mask is, we first got to understand what a single pixel is on an image. Now, a pixel is one of the thousands of dots within an image that make up an entire photo. Each individual pixel is made up of two different values. The first value is the luminosity or brightness of that pixel, and the second value is the color or hue of that pixel. Together, combined with all the other pixels, this makes up the entirety of what an image looks like. Now let's revert back to the first value that I brought up, which is luminosity. And as I said, that relates directly to the brightness of a pixel. So the brighter a pixel is, the more luminosity it has. The darker it is, the less luminosity it has. Therefore, we can take that concept and apply it to a luminosity mask. A luminosity mask is essentially just a mask that's determined based on the brightness level of the pixels already in the photo. So let me go ahead and show you an example. So if I jump right into Photoshop here with this first image of this cactus here, I have already generated a luminosity mask on this image. If I go ahead and Alt-click, I can make that mask full screen. So now you could see this mask here is based entirely on the brightness of this image. Where these cactus points are the brightest, that's where the most white is in this mask. Where it is the darkest, that's where the darkness is most present in this mask. So if we undo that, we can now go to the settings of this adjustment here and adjust the brightness, for example, up here, but it's only going to adjust the brightness where those most bright points already are. Since this mask is based entirely on lightness, is what we would call a lights 1 mask. Let's go hop to another example here. So we got this old abandoned barn right here, and let's check out the luminosity mask that I made. So if we Alt-click and make that full screen, you can see that this is now a reverse luminosity mask. Also what we would call a darks luminosity mask. That means it's based entirely on what points are the darkest. So as you can see, if we were to take this off, these points have the most darkness. So now the mask is only showing and only going to affect those very dark parts of the image. So this luminosity mask is essentially the complete opposite of this one here. The reason you might want to create a mask like this is if I want to pull out these dark spots here. One thing in particular with photographs you should know is that if there's a point in the photo that's completely black, it'll pull the eye in that direction. Similar to the way if there's a point in a photo that's completely white, it'll pull the eye there. So if we go ahead and reduce the contrast of this area here and maybe even increase the brightness a bit, we can now get a much more balanced image here with this forest, and that dark spot won't nearly be as distracting. And you can only accomplish this through a luminosity mask. Now, as you can see, these masks are extremely specific to various parts of an image, and this allows you to make very fine and specific adjustments to any part of the image you want. As you start to get deeper and deeper into your editing process, luminosity masks will become mainstream in your editing. I use this process in almost every single photo I edit in one way or another. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into the next section where I want to talk about how to create a luminosity mask. We're going to go ahead and do that with this image. And I chose this image because it's got a nice balance of super bright points and super dark points here. So one thing to keep in mind as we jump into this next section here is that there's a lot of points to remember with how to create a luminosity mask. Right now, I'm going to be going in and showing you the traditional old school way to create a luminosity mask. At the end of this course, I'm going to show you some third-party plugins that can make this process much easier so you don't have to remember every single step of the process here, because believe me, there's a lot. The first luminosity mask we're going to want to create is a lights 1 mask, which is the same mask we used for this first image here. So in order to do this, we're going to first go over to the channels panel here, and you can click window channels and pull that up if you don't have one. And all we're going to do is control click on this RGB layer right here. And as you can see, that's going to make a selection of a lights 1 mask. To put that into a saved channel, we're going to click this button right here, and it's going to show up as alpha 1. Now we're going to go through and rename this to lights 1. If we go ahead and deselect this lights 1 right here, we can now go through and apply that mask to an adjustment layer. The only thing we have to do is we control click on it. It's going to select that lights 1. Then we could go and apply an adjustment such as the brightness contrast. Now we can make adjustments only to those brighter pixels in the mask. I'll go ahead and pull this up full screen, and you can see this is a perfect lights 1 mask here. If we wanted to, we can even create more adjustments like a hue/saturation and drag this up to here by holding Alt and letting go. Now we can go ahead and change the saturation of only those super bright parts of the image there. So that's what we would call a lights 1 mask, which is the very base of all luminosity masks. So by this point, you're probably wondering what a lights 2 mask is. And this is where it's going to start to get a little bit more complicated. So let's hop back into the channel selection here. So now as you can see, we have the lights 1 mask here. Now a lights 2 mask would be a lights 1 mask multiplied by another lights 1 mask. Now I know that sounds crazy, but let me show you what I mean. So if we wanted to make a lights 2, we would simply control click on this to pull up a selection of it. And then we're going to go ahead and Control Shift Alt click on this. And as you can see, there's a little X icon next to the cursor there. And when we click, it's going to go ahead and make an even more detailed selection here. So now if we save this, we have a lights 2 mask. So now as you can see here, it is now starting to darken more of the image and keeping the points that are the most bright still alive. If we were to go ahead and create a lights 3 mask, we would simply do the same thing, control click, and then control shift alt click on it again to multiply it, and then save the selection. And now we have a lights 3 mask. So now, as you can see, if we deselect, that is even more isolating those very bright points as we go down the line here. So now this could be useful, for example, if we want to select this lights 3 and go in here and perhaps change the brightness contrast. Now it's only going to change the brightness of those very, very bright points. So as you can see up here in the sky, it's only changing the brightness of those and maybe a little bit in here. So that is how you can create a lights 1 through 3 mask, and you could keep going up to infinity, but eventually those lights are just going to decrease to the point where there's nothing. So that begs the question, what would a darks mask be? And essentially it's the complete opposite of a lights mask. So let's go ahead and create a darks 1 mask. And as you can see here, this is showing in the channels because it is selected here. If we go ahead and deselect that, it will get rid of that and make it a little bit less confusing. So to create a darks 1, we're simply going to control click on the lights 1. Then we're going to control shift I click on it, which is going to invert that selection here. And now we can go ahead and save that as a selection there. And now we can name this a darks 1. deselect, and there you have it. So now only the darkest points of this image are being shown. So let's go ahead and create a darks 2 with the same mentality of how we created a lights 2. We would simply control click on this to select it, then control shift alt click until we see that multiply sign. Then when we click, we can go ahead and save this selection as a darks 2. So now if we want to use this darks 2, we can simply deselect that, control click on it, then go back to our layers and make an adjustment with that mask right there. So now as you can see, if we make this full screen, we have that darks 2 mask applied to this adjustment layer. Now, for example, I could pull down the contrast in it and maybe up the brightness a bit, and that's gonna help bring out the brightness in these darker spots of the trees here. As you can see though, it's still pulling out a bit brightness in here. So if I wanted to, I could really go back and now create a darks 3 mask. Let's deselect that. Control click, and then control shift alt click again, create a mask, and now we are getting a darks 3 mask. So let's go ahead and see what this one looks like if we were to apply it to a layer mask. So now it's starting to get a bit more specific with these trees here and less on here. As you can see with this, it is now not increasing the brightness of these pillars and these very dark spots compared to the darks 1, which is right here where it would simply increase all of it here. So if I were to keep going down the line there and creating more and more darks masks, I could eventually get to the point where only these very dark spots on the tree are isolated, and I can increase the brightness of those. So now let's go ahead and talk about the third type of luminosity mask, which is a midtones mask. And the midtones are essentially, like it sounds, the middle tones or middle luminosity value pixels within an image. This means they're not the brightest and they're not the darkest. They're only the middle grade gray pixels. So in order to create a midtones luminosity mask, we're essentially going to have to subtract a lights 1 mask and also subtract a darks 1 mask from the entire image. So to start, we're gonna hit Control A, which is going to select the entire image. Now we're going to Control Alt click on a lights 1. As you can see, it's creating that minus sign right next to it. We're gonna click there. And then we're also gonna Control Alt click on a darks 1, which is going to subtract that darks 1. And now we're gonna get this warning. No pixels more than 50% selected. The selection edges will not be visible. So this is a fine point to make. If less than 50% of the pixels are selected in an image, this warning is telling me that marching ants aren't gonna show up. So you're not gonna see these zebra stripe marching ant things anymore to demonstrate what is selected. So let's click OK there. And then if we click Save as Selection, we're gonna get a nice little midtones 1 luminosity mask right here. Boom. So now we can use this selection by control clicking on it and hopping over to the layers panel here. And let's do a saturation. So now we can increase the saturation of only the middle tones in this image. So now if we want to create a midtones 2 luminosity mask, we would simply click Control A to select the whole image here. And then we would subtract a lights 2 and a darks 2 from it. So let's go ahead and Control Alt click on the lights 2, and then Control Alt click on a darks 2, and then save that selection. And now we have a nice, sexy midtones 2 mask here for our disposal. And that is how you create the broad spectrum of luminosity masks, the lights, darks, and midtones. And like I said before, you can just keep creating numbers higher and higher until you get less and less of a mask. So that is essentially what luminosity masks are in a nutshell. Now, You might be wondering, how can I go forth and edit those luminosity masks? So let's go ahead and talk about how to do that. So let's go ahead and just select a lights 1 luminosity mask. So now let's create a brightness contrast with this, and we have the luminosity mask here. Hit Alt, click, and now we could bring this in full screen. So now say I want to go ahead and edit this specific luminosity mask right here. In order to do that, I can go ahead and hop right up to the image tab up here and click the adjustments here, and I could edit this with a brightness, levels, or curves adjustment. So let's head to the levels adjustment here. And now I can go ahead and adjust this luminosity mask to how I want it to be based off of specifics. So this might be an easier way to go ahead and fix up a luminosity mask. If you don't want to go ahead and create a lights 1, lights 2, lights 3, you can simply pop in here and make more specific adjustments yourself. So if I were to click OK there, now I have this luminosity mask ready to be used. One point I did want to make, however, is that all those changes I just made will be baked right into the mask here. So now if I were to go back up and try to make an adjustment again on that, as you can see, I'm gonna have already lost a little bit of that white detail that we had before, and it is permanent. So the only way to go back and restore this mask from the beginning is to start over and grab another selection from the lights 1 mask in the channels panel. One more thing I wanted to mention with these masks is that you can invert them. So if you go up to adjustments here, you can just hit the invert button here, which could potentially save you a bunch of time in creating darks luminosity masks. So let's go ahead and undo that. And I also think it goes without saying, but you could obviously brush in any changes manually you need to if you just get the black and white paintbrush to edit these masks. One thing I want to also go over is a hue mask, which a lot of photographers lump into the category of a luminosity mask. Now, a hue or color mask isn't technically a luminosity mask because it's not based on the brightness. For some reason, it just gets lumped into this category. So let's go ahead and talk about how to create a color mask. For this image here, if we wanted to make a mask based around the green, we would simply go up to the selection button here and click color range. Now we can go ahead and sample a certain color here and make a mask based on that color. So say I want to select this yellow here. We can now go ahead and adjust this so that it's accounting for that yellow only. Say I want to add a bit more green into that, I can click this plus button and add that color green into it, and now start to refine this mask how I want it. So let's hit OK there. Got that selection, and now I could go ahead and click a adjustment, for example, the saturation, and now it will adjust the saturation of only those greens. So we did go over that in the selections video, but I wanted to go ahead and review because it's kind of a luminosity mask, kind of not, depending on who you ask. So that is everything you need to know about luminosity masks in general. Now let's talk about how to make your luminosity mask experience 20 times easier. And we're gonna go ahead and do this by showing you what a panel is. So one example of a panel is the TK Go module right here. So in order to create a luminosity mask, all I have to do is click this button here, and now I could create a lights 1, 2, 3, 4, or a darks 5, 3, or a mids 2, or a 3, and it's generating that preview right here for me. I can now even go in and modify this mask exactly how I want it without having to go up and do a manual adjustment up here in the mask. Once I have the mask how I want it, I could simply output it to any of the adjustment layers that we normally use in Photoshop. So if I want to add it to a brightness, I can click this and it will automatically make that mask for me, saving me potentially hundreds of hours of time if you do this on a regular basis. Another thing I could do is create a color mask. So I can click this here, do exactly what we just did earlier, except now I can generate it much quicker and begin to modify it a little better. I could even start to incorporate more colors here and simply adjust it how I want and then output it to whatever kind of adjustment I need. Another thing you could do with these panels is saturation and vibrance masks. So I can create masks based on parts of the image that are the most saturated. So these kind of panels have all sorts of features that you could dig into to make your luminosity mask experience way easier. And I'm not just talking about the TK Go panel here, which is one of the most popular types of luminosity mask panels. There's also the Lumenzia panel here, which if we click on here, you can see that's what it looks like here. Personally, I don't use this one very much, but some people prefer it. And there's also Raya Pro, which is another very popular luminosity mask panel, as you can see all the buttons here. So if you go down and sit with one of these panels and get all the tutorials that come along with it, you can go through and learn what all these individual buttons mean, because it can take a little while to get in the flow of using them. However, in the long run, I would say it's worth it. So that's everything you need to know about luminosity masks, from the old school way of generating them all the way up to these new panels you can get, which will make the process way easier. And at the end of the day, it honestly just takes a little bit of practice. I know that was a lot of information to dump on you in this video, but trust me, it is worth it. I use luminosity masks in almost every single image I edit nowadays. So let's go ahead and hop to the next video.